happened recently. Sami Zayn lost the WWE Championship. And my reaction wasn't what I expected. I wasn't angry. I wasn't heartbroken. I wasn't yelling at my television, mostly because televisions are kind of expensive and rather obsolete now. But I just kind of sat there, to be honest with you. And that's when something hit me. I didn't really feel anything with this. And if you've loved something for over 25 years, as much as I have when it comes to professional wrestling, that's a little bit scary. I've watched wrestling through middle school, through high school, through college, jobs, relationships, marriage, through becoming a dad. Wrestling has been one of the biggest constants in my life. And so when something suddenly just makes you stop and ask yourself, like, why didn't I feel like what I thought was going to, like, why didn't I feel what I thought what I was going to feel? That's worth talking about. And so before anybody panics, no, I'm not quitting wrestling. I survived, the anonymous Raw general manager, the guest host era, Katie Vick, Hornswoggle being Vince McMahon's son, JBL. I actually like JBL as WWE champion. I stand on JBL as WWE champion. I've survived through some things, though. And but what's interesting is that none of those moments made me question why I watched wrestling, but this past one did with Sami Zayn's, title run or lack thereof. So, I've spent the last couple of weeks trying to figure out exactly why this bothered me so much. And I realized that if you didn't grow up loving professional wrestling, this entire video probably sounds rather ridiculous. I mean, really, like, oh, I'm overthinking wrestling. Yes, I did. I am way overanalyzing professional wrestling because, as I just mentioned, this was my life. And for 10 years, I even covered it. So, yeah, allow me to really and if you haven't seen, I've done other videos where I do extensive breakdowns of things. So, yeah, it's kind of my thing to overthink. So I might as well channel that power for some good. Because wrestling was never just another TV show to me. It wasn't just background noise. It wasn't something I'd watch because nothing else was on. It became part of kind of who I was. Now, I was 13 years old when I first got into wrestling, and my mom accidentally she won tickets through her work to go to SmackDown here in Boston. And basically the way it worked was that you could get like comped tickets for certain shows. Usually the nosebleed seats, nothing crazy. But my dad was the one who took me. And looking back, I didn't realize just really obviously the impact that one moment was going to have on me. And it's funny because I still remember walking into the arena, the lights, the music, the excitement for everything. I've never been to a wrestling event before. And if you've ever been to one, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. There's like an ambiance and an air to it, kind of like the circus, but more elevated and more pageantry and pomp and circumstance to it, I guess you could say. Television certainly doesn't do it justice, not usually anyway. And when the first entrance music hit, 10,000 people explode. It's just electric. And from that night on, it was a fun time. And it's funny because I didn't know anything about the characters. I didn't know anything about the gimmicks. I didn't know anything about the matches. All I cared about was trying to be seen on TV because it was a SmackDown. And back then, they taped SmackDowns on Tuesdays, and then they would air them on, I believe they were still on Thursdays on UPN at that time. It was the year 2000. And so I didn't, know any better. I was just waving to get seen on TV. And then when I went back and watched SmackDown looking for myself, which there was no way in hell I was going to be able to see myself, that's when the ADHD focused the attention on what was actually being presented. And I was just hooked. First obsession, though, first major wrestler that obviously caught my eye and still is my goat and yours is, of course, The Undertaker. Now, most kids would have picked, of course, like The Rock. I mean, Stone Cold was at his height. Even Triple H had some badass moves to himself, or, the personality. But not me. I looked at all those options and naturally said, you know what, Liv, give me the 7-foot undead funeral director. That guy seems very perfectly reasonable. But seriously, nobody looked at him. Nobody looked like him. Nobody felt like him. The entrance, the lighting, the bells, the hat, the coat, the supernatural element. And even then, he was doing the American Badass stuff. And while he was still, kind of in similar territory to the other top stars, he did stand out on his own. And even when he switched back over to the, the supernatural side, he almost felt like a walking, god or goddess in mythology. He felt mythological, and it was just like coming to life. And to this day, I would challenge anybody to find another character who captured that same feeling. I'll argue that Bray Wyatt, in my opinion, has probably come the closest. Maybe, but Undertaker was just different. He wasn't just a character either. And as I got older, I learned, who Mark Calloway was, the human being backstage, the locker room leader, the guy everyone respected, the guy who carried himself with the professionalism. And, somehow that just made me appreciate The Undertaker even more. Now, my first pay-per-view was SummerSlam 2000. And from that point, I was all in. I wanted to watch everything. Raw, SmackDown, Heat, Sunday Night Heat, Velocity, Confidential. If WWE was on television at some point in time, most of the time I was glued to that television set. But if you ask me what wrestling memory I'll probably never, I'll remember forever is Royal Rumble 2003. It wasn't watching from my bedroom. It wasn't reading results online. Twitter wasn't even a thing back then. I was there, man. I was there with my dad. And we were sitting up in the lodge section, which is like the balconies, basically. And I actually had a Kane mask on because that previous Halloween, Kane was really hot. He had just come back from an injury, and he had that second mask that he had, the one that had the mouthpiece cut out, from 2003. Look it up. And I was obsessed with Kane at that point. Like Taker was still my guy, but I was a big Kane fan. And just, again, Taker's brother, and then The Undertaker came out in Royal Rumble 2003, and the place erupted. He was the final, person in the Rumble. Lesnar's coming out, massive reaction, and just sitting there. I honestly felt like I was watching superheroes come to life. And I remember leaving that building completely exhausted. My voice was shot. I was tired, but I couldn't stop smiling. And here's the thing. I don't actually remember every bit of the whole night. I remember most of it, the matches. I don't remember every single move. And I do have a good core memory of some of the finishes and stuff, but I remember more exactly how it made me feel. And that's what wrestling was. It was a feeling. It was hope. Hope that the impossible might happen. Hope that the underdog might win. Hope that maybe, just maybe, something would happen tonight that we'd end up talking about for years. And the crazy thing is, it kept happening. You go back in the past and look at Mankind when he won the WWE Championship. And then not too long after that, when I was in the Rumble 03, Eddie Guerrero finally winning the WWE Championship. Edge cashing in the Money in the Bank briefcase for the first time. CM Punk's pipe bomb. Daniel Bryan winning at WrestleMania 30. And then, most recently, Cody Rhodes finishing the story. Every single one of those moments made me feel this exact same feeling, even for a brief a moment it might have been, which was wonder. And that's when I realized something while writing this out. My favorite wrestling moments were never really about championships. They weren't about ratings. They weren't even about the 5-star matches. They were about believing. And that's exactly why we need to talk about Sami Zayn. Now, so just let's get back to Sami in terms of, I know it took me a little bit to get back here, but honestly, I don't think I could have explained this next part without kind of first giving you a little bit of, background as to why wrestling meant so much to me. Because here's the thing. This isn't really about Sami Zayn. It's not about Punk per se. It's more about what Sami represented. So I've been watching wrestling for over 25 years, and I've seen just about everything. I've seen terrible gimmicks. I've seen incredible gimmicks. I've seen Vince McMahon blow himself up, only to somehow come back a week later. I've watched wrestling long enough that if I listed everything I've seen, this video would somehow become longer than WrestleMania. And yet, after all those years, you start developing these kind of, I guess, instincts, for lack of a better word. You start looking at the roster differently. You start looking at the business differently. You start looking at who sells merchandise. You start looking at television. You start looking at who's on the posters. You stop asking, like, who do you think's going to win? And instead, who's supposed to win? And I really hate kind of, admitting that at times. Because the 13-year-old me didn't never thought that way, right? And he wasn't wondering about like TV ratings. He wasn't, didn't know what a quarterly earnings report was, didn't know media rights deals. Just want to see Undertaker chokeslam somebody. And, honestly, life it's an old cliche adage, but back then life was simpler. So when Sami won the WWE Championship, my very first reaction was, well, it wasn't really necessarily excitement. It was more like, wait, they actually did it? And I don't mean that disrespectfully. I love Sami Zayn. I've loved his work for years. But if you've watched WWE long enough, you kind of know how this usually goes. The safe choice wins. The obvious choice wins. The marketable choice wins. The WrestleMania poster wins. So when Sami won, I genuinely sat there, kind of smiling. Not necessarily because he won, not that I didn't appreciate it per se, but because WWE surprised me. And I realized I missed being surprised. And immediately, my brain started doing what wrestling fans do. I started imagining where the story was going. I thought maybe we were finally going to get the ultimate underdog story. This guy who probably isn't supposed to be champion, doing absolutely everything he can just to survive. Every title defense, feeling it just might be his last, or maybe even something more interesting. Or what if the championship slowly corrupted the last truly good guy? I would have watched either one, to be honest for you. And for 9 days, I genuinely believed that is where we were headed. 9 days. I don't know why that number sticks in my head so much, but it really does, because for 9 days, I bought in. I stopped thinking like a reviewer. I stopped thinking like OKayFabe. I stopped thinking like somebody trying to predict the next premium live events. I just became a wrestling fan again. And then CM Punk won. Now, here's where people are going to assume they know what I'm about to say. Oh, he's mad because Punk won. No, not even close. I actually love CM Punk. He's one of my favorite wrestlers of all time, believe it or not. Favorite promo? Pipe bomb, just like everyone else's. This guy can make me believe almost anything if you had a microphone in his hand. So this isn't an anti-Punk statement. In fact, from a business perspective, it makes complete sense. You're trying to make SummerSlam bigger than ever. You want another marquee attraction. You want a massive WWE championship match. You want mainstream attention. If I were sitting in WWE headquarters, I'd probably make the exact same business decision. And maybe that is exactly the problem. When Punk won, I wasn't expected to be angry. I expected to jump on social media to maybe, throw a video together, record a rant per se, maybe to start fantasy booking things and kind of do this. And I just kind of shrugged and just went, eh. And that part right there was more that scared me more than anything else. Not because Punk won, but because I realized I wasn't emotionally invested enough anymore to be upset. I wasn't devastated. I wasn't excited. I wasn't shocked. I was just indifferent. And indifference is a really dangerous thing, especially when you're talking about something you've loved for over half of your life. So I started asking myself why. What was it because WWE had changed? Was it because of TKO? Was it because of Triple H? Was it because of CM Punk? Or was it because I wasn't 13 years old anymore? Because the more I thought about it, the more I realized I don't think this started with Sami. I don't even think it really started with WWE. I think it started the moment I stopped watching wrestling and started trying to understand it. And this is something, um, you know, I've spent this entire video asking one question, like, did wrestling change or did I? And honestly, I think I've been asking the very wrong, the wrong question, basically. And I don't think it happened overnight. I don't think there was, just I ran an episode of Raw where I said, yeah, it feels a little off. I think this kind of happened more over time, more gradually. And so, so gradually, I never, kind of really noticed it. I remember being around like 18 years old and WWE started releasing like this is the time of year like the time where WWE was releasing like a crap ton of documentaries, like one after the other, like Rapid Fire, Monday Night War, Rise and Fall of ECW, Self Destruction of Ultimate Warrior, Wrestling, the history of WrestleMania, Rise of DX, like the history of X, whatever championship. And I was fascinated, not because of the matches, but because I wanted to learn and know and know the why. Why did Steve Austin become Steve Austin? Why did Vince McMahon become Mr. McMahon? Why did some wrestlers become legends and others just faded away into obscurity, as Mr. Heyman would say? And I wasn't just watching wrestling anymore, I was studying it. And honestly, I loved it. I learned about booking, psychology, character work, heel turns, baby faces, payoffs, long-term storytelling. And I learned the best wrestling stories weren't really about championships. They were about the people. They were about the characters. And I had absolutely no idea that learning all of that would completely change how I watch wrestling forever. And then something different happened. I stopped becoming just a fan and I turned into a content creator. And I went by the name OKayFabe, which was obviously, for those who don't know, kayfabe is the pro wrestling language that is, or the guise of wrestling using terminology to cover up the idea that wrestling is a predetermined form of entertainment. So the terms like babyface, heel would be like code words or code things to do to keep the illusion of kayfabe, meaning that everyone the what you saw in the ring was real. And so I wanted to make a little tongue-in-cheek pun reference so that the wrestling fans who knew would get the reference right away. And for almost 10 years, wrestling became more than just a hobby for me. I was reviewing Raw every week. I was reviewing SmackDown. I was making prediction videos, booking storylines. I was debating people, interviewing video. I spending WrestleMania weekends surrounded by other fans just like me. And honestly, those are still some of my favorite memories. Not because of the views, and definitely not because of the money. There wasn't much of that. There really wasn't. But because of the people. I met incredible wrestling fans. I had conversations I'll never forget. I have made friendships that I still hold to this day. I got to experience WrestleMania 32 weekend surrounded by people who understood why this crazy form of entertainment meant so much. And if I could go back, I would do it all over again. But here's the problem. When your job or your hobby becomes analyzing something, you stop experiencing it in the same way. So I stopped asking, who's going to win and started asking what's the smarter business decision. I stopped wondering where is this story going, and I started wondering how are they going to try to get us to SummerSlam. I stopped watching like a fan and I started watching it like an analyst. And that's not WWE's fault. That's definitely more mine. I was thinking about this the other day. Wrestling is a lot like watching a magician. When you're a kid, you don't care how the trick works. You just sit there with your mouth hanging open, wondering, how in the hell did he do that? And that's the magic. But then you grow up and you learn how the tricks work. You learn about misdirection. You learn where the mirrors are. You learn how the rabbit got into the hat. And don't get me wrong, you appreciate it. In fact, you probably appreciate the skill even more, but you'll never watch that trick the same way again. And I think that's what happened to me. So when Sami won, I wasn't just watching the story, I was watching the booking. And when CM Punk won, I wasn't watching the emotion, I was watching the business. And somewhere along the way, I accidentally trained myself to stop being surprised. And then the internet came along and made it even worse. Now, before Raw even starts, I already know 3 rumored returns. I know whose contract is expiring. I know who's allegedly pitched what. I know who Fightful says is going to get a push. I know what Twitter thinks. I know what Reddit thinks. I know what every podcast thinks. And half the time, I don't even watch Raw live anymore. I catch highlights. I scroll Twitter. I watch clips on YouTube. And, every once in a while, I'll realize I've consumed an entire wrestling show without actually watching the wrestling show, which is really insane when you say it out loud like that. And then I started thinking about 13-year-old Connor. He wasn't trying to, he was, trying to sneak Raw in past his bedtime. I'd have the volume turned down just enough that my parents wouldn't hear it. And I'd be sitting there hoping that the Undertaker would show up. And I had absolutely no idea what was going to happen. And honestly, I wouldn't have wanted to know. Today, I usually know the results before I even turn the show on. And that's not WWE's fault. It's just the world we live in. So maybe I haven't fallen out of love with wrestling, and maybe I've just fallen too far behind the curtain. And that's when I realized Sami wasn't really the beginning of the story. He was just the moment that finally made me notice what was going on. So let's talk about WWE. Let's talk about that for a second, because if you've made it this far, you've probably been waiting for me to spend 20 minutes, yelling at Triple H. And I'm sorry to disappoint you, because here's the weird thing. I actually think modern WWE is really good. I know. I can already hear somebody typing out some hate comments down below and disliking the video. But no, seriously, let's just look at it objectively, okay? The company is making more money now than ever. The production is unbelievable. The roster is stacked. NXT has become one of the best developmental systems in wrestling history. They're working with TNA, their own AAA, something I honestly never thought I'd see in my life. They've embraced social media more so than ever. They've become a worldwide entertainment brand. And honestly, at the end of the day, it's very impressive. So here's the irony. I think that Triple H deserves a ton of credit. And if you've asked me 10 years ago, who should eventually take over creative, my answer probably would have been Triple H. And for a while, it felt like he couldn't miss. NXT, the black and gold, was incredible. It felt fresh. It felt different. It felt hungry. But now, I just think something's changed. And not because I think Triple H suddenly forgot how to book wrestling, but because the environment's changed. WWE isn't just WWE anymore. It's part of something much bigger. And I don't mean that as a criticism. I mean that as a reality. Because when I was growing up, WWE felt like this rebellious little universe. It was weird. It was unpredictable. It felt dangerous. And today it feels more polished than ever. Professional, corporate, sterile. And I know that's kind of a harsh word, but I keep coming back to it. Sterile. Now, when I say WWE feels sterile, I'm not saying it's boring. I'm not saying that the wrestlers aren't talented. I'm not saying the stories aren't good. I'm talking about the presentation. It just feels like every corner of the show has a sponsor. Every premium live event presented by somebody. The ring, the barricades, the announce desk, the graphics, the press conferences, the attendance announcements, the gate records, the constant reminders that WWE is breaking another financial record. And again, none of those things are inherently bad. In fact, as someone who wants to see wrestling to succeed, I love seeing wrestling succeed. I want WWE to make money. I want AEW to make money. I want TNA to make money. I want independent wrestling to thrive. The healthier wrestling is, the better it is for everybody. But there is a difference between success and wonder. When I was 13, I didn't care how much money WWE made. I didn't know. I didn't want to know. I just wanted to know who was walking through the curtain next. And I once described modern WWE as feeling like McDonald's than the alternative. Or feeling more like... I once described modern WWE as feeling more like McDonald's than the alternative. And maybe that's not the perfect comparison anymore. So let me explain what I mean. McDonald's, of course, is incredibly successful, right? Obviously, it's consistent. You know exactly what you're getting. It's available everywhere. It becomes part of the culture. It's that's an incredible business. But nobody walks into McDonald's wondering what's going to happen. You know? Like, I mean, maybe depending on what McDonald's you go to, and that's up for debate. But WWE used to make me wonder. And now today, WWE feels like a global entertainment brand. And that's not automatically a bad thing. It's just different. And honestly, they still get it right. You know, Cody Rhodes finishing the story. That kind of made me feel like a kid again in some regards. I jumped off the couch. I smiled. I actually believed maybe, we're entering a new era. And that's why Sami winning meant so much. Because for 9 days, I felt that feeling again. But then we'd get something that reminded me maybe we're just still playing it safe. The John Cena heel turn, I love that idea. I just wanted more. The New Day heel turn, again, great idea. I just wanted it to hit harder. The brand split, sometimes I forget it even exists. The number of championships. I grew up when the championship felt like the championship, and now sometimes I need Michael Cole to remind me which championship is which. And here's what I want to make very clear. I'm not saying my ideas are better. I'm not saying I could book WWE. I'm definitely not saying Triple H doesn't know what he's doing, because if we're being honest, he's forgotten more about wrestling than I'll ever know. What I'm saying is simpler. I miss the feeling that anything could happen. And maybe that's not WWE's fault. Maybe it's mine. Because the more I thought about it, this in general, the more I realized the biggest thing I miss isn't the Attitude Era, it isn't the blood, it isn't the chair shots, it isn't the crash TV, it's mystery. And there's one word that another word I keep coming into this. There's several of them, but mystery. Not kayfabe, not pretending wrestling is real, not protecting the business. I'm talking about mystery. We talk about practice. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. The feeling of sitting down on a Monday night, having absolutely no idea what was about to happen. One of the greatest sounds in wrestling history, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, the Royal Rumble countdown, right? Every single time. Didn't matter who you wanted. It didn't matter if you were 10 years old or 40. Those 10 seconds, almost anything, felt possible. You'd sit there, please be Taker, Kane, Shawn, somebody amazing, and for 10 seconds you believed. And today, I usually know who's coming back. Again, contract. I know who's getting a push, Fightful. I know Twitter. I know Reddit. I know every podcast. I know before Raw starts. And honestly, it's kind of sad. I caught myself doing something a few months ago. I was watching Raw, or at least I thought I was. I had Twitter open. I was scrolling, checking reactions, reading comments, looking at clips, and then it hit me. I had spent more time watching other people react to wrestling than actually watching wrestling. And I don't think I'm alone in that, obviously. I mean, it's easy to blame WWE. It's easy to blame TKO. It's easy to blame creative. But maybe we just changed also, too, and we just don't watch wrestling anymore. We consume it. We dissect it. And, we argue about it. We fantasy book. We rank. We meme it. We spoil. And somewhere between all of that, we forgot to just experience it. Now, I'll admit, I love fantasy booking. Who doesn't, right? I always have. And some of my favorite memories from the OKayFabe weren't reviewing shows. It was sitting around with friends asking, how would you do it? How would you book rating? How would you turn so-and-so heel? And I still love that. But I also think it accidentally changed how I watch wrestling. Instead of asking, what story they trying to tell, I'd ask, why didn't they tell my story? That's not fair, Earlier I said, wrestling is at its worst when it insults the audience's intelligence. And I still believe that. And here's the funny thing. I think fans can accidentally insult their own intelligence, too, because we convince ourselves we know exactly what's coming. And sometimes we're right, but sometimes we're so busy predicting the ending, we never enjoy the story. Remember I said earlier about the magician? I think I finally figured out what the trick actually is. The trick was never the illusion. The trick was the wonder. And wonder only exists when you don't know. I answered a question earlier, and I didn't realize how much it was going to affect me. I said if I could experience wrestling again the way I was 13, I wish I could pass that feeling on to my kids. And the more I thought about that, the more emotional it became, because I don't care if my kids become wrestling fans. They might, they may not, and that's okay. What I care about is that someday they find something that makes them feel the way wrestling made me feel. Music, art, books, sports, something. Maybe it's something I've never even heard of before, but I hope they find it. Because everybody deserves to have something that completely captures their imagination. And so when people ask me, why I love wrestling so much, I don't think the answer is the Undertaker or championships or WrestleMania. I think the answer is the creativity. Wrestling showed me that stories could make people feel, taught me heroes, villains, redemption, failure, gray areas, hope. And honestly, I don't think I'd be sitting here today writing the Rogue Shadeblade series like I have if I hadn't fallen in love with wrestling first. So maybe wrestling didn't just entertain me, but rather shaped me. So after all this, after spending like the last half hour talking about Sami Zayn, CM Punk, TKO, the internet growing up, my dad, OKayFabe, I think I finally have my answer. I don't think wrestling is broken. I don't think that Triple H has lost. I don't think TKO has ruined WWE. And I definitely don't think that CM Punk winning the championship ruined wrestling. Trust me, if that ruined wrestling, I would have stopped somewhere around the guest host era of Raw. I mean, that was pretty brutal. I think the truth is a lot simpler. Yes, WWE has changed. The business changed. The internet changed. Social media changed. The fans, I should say, have changed. And so did I. And maybe that's okay. When I was 13, I didn't know what a television rights deal was. I didn't know what a quarterly earnings meant. I didn't know what a dirt sheet was. I didn't know what the phrase, creative is nothing for you. I just wanted to hear that gong. I wanted to hear Undertaker's music. I wanted to hear the Royal Rumble countdown. I wanted to believe. I think somewhere along the way, I confused knowing more with enjoying more. And those aren't always the same thing. I know more about wrestling today than I ever have. I understand booking. I understand business. I understand ratings. I understand contracts. I understand why decisions get made. But understanding something doesn't always make it more magical. And I've been thinking a lot about 13-year-old me. And I picture, sitting in my bedroom trying to keep the television volume really low so my parents don't know that I'm still watching Raw at like 10:30 at night. I had school the next morning. I'm exhausted. I didn't care because what if something like crazy happened? What if Taker showed up? What if Kane returned? What if, tonight became one of those nights? He wasn't worried about business. He wasn't worried about ratings. He wasn't worried about what Twitter thought. He was just a fan. And honestly, I miss that kid. But I don't miss him at the same time because wrestling was better. I miss him because he reminded me how to believe. And like I said before, I wish I could pass that feeling on to my kids. And the more I think about it, the more I realize that that's what this has all been really about in terms of their reaction. I don't care if they become fans. I don't care. I, I don't care. I don't care if they became wrestling fans. I don't care. I don't. What I care about is that someday they find something that makes them feel the way wrestling made me feel. And, looking through everything and looking ahead, when people ask me why I loved wrestling, I don't think it was because of championships or Taker, Mania. It's because it taught me that stories matter. It taught me that heroes inspire, villains will challenge us, and that redemption is possible. That good people can fail, that bad people can change, and that life isn't always quite black and white. Sometimes there's gray, and looking back, I honestly think I kind of became a writer because I fell in love with wrestling. Rogue Shade Blade exists because I spent 25 years watching people tell stories inside a wrestling ring. So thank you to every wrestler who ever made me believe. And, so did wrestling change? Yeah, it did. Did I change? Absolutely. But here's what I realized while making this video. I'm still here. I'm still watching. I'm still tuning in. Every Rumble, Mania, every big moment. And because somewhere deep down, I still believe the next Monday night might surprise us. That next WrestleMania might create another memory I'll never forget. And maybe wrestling isn't the same anymore. Maybe I'm not either. But every once in a while, a story comes along, and just for a moment, I'm 13-year-old me again, sitting next to my dad, wearing a Kane mask, waiting for Taker. And I have absolutely no idea what's going to happen next. And honestly, I hope I never stop chasing that feeling. Thanks for tuning in for this. Let me know your thoughts. Love to hear from you. Thanks for subscribing while I've been away. And looking forward to chatting in the future. Stay well, friends. Peace.